We're glad you're here. Welcome to Bethesda Baptist Church. My name is Pastor Wesley Hunt. If you're not familiar with our church, I hope most of you are. Many of you are members here. Some of you are members in the community churches. And if I don't know you, hope to introduce myself to you before the day is over. We're doing something today unlike anything we've ever done. So if it's not like you think it needs to be, there's a card in your packet there that says suggested future topics. You can scratch through that and say complaints or whatever and fill that out before the day's over. And we hope that this is the beginning of something helpful to our senior adult community and to our community at large generally. As a pastor now for 27 years at this church, I have encountered many people in the stage of life nearing the end, running well, a life of faith, and yet sometimes with a lot of looming questions unanswered and family members around them struggling to help answer those questions, oftentimes in a time of impending emergency. And so as we've been talking about this in a group of leaders in the church about 4 or 5 months ago, we said, what can we do? And we said, well, we could offer some information. And they said, well, who would we offer it to? I said, well, we could offer it to everybody, because if the Lord wills, we'll all get older and we'll all face different kinds of questions. And so for this to be the first of these we've done, the disclaimer we put on it is it's the first of these we've done. And then also we have intentionally asked our speakers to be general in the things that they share. At the end, you can also say, well, that person piqued my interest and I have a question. There's also a place on here to write a question for today, okay? One side says questions for the panel. The last 20 minutes of the day this morning before lunch, we're going to have a panel discussion and I'll moderate it. I can't promise you we'll answer your question, but right before we do it, we'll gather all these up and I'll just sort through them and begin to ask the panel some questions. So we can get you more specific answers today, but what we know we can't do, we know we'll not answer everybody's specific question today. That's not even really our intent. Our intent is to give you the permission to think about some of these things, about what I'm doing as I'm living, and even what I'm doing maybe as I'm preparing to die and to leave others running a race of faith myself. I was thinking about what the Bible says about Job, and some of you know this passage of Scripture. It says that the latter days of Job were better than the earlier days of Job, and Job had a hard life. It says, but in his latter days he had lots of sheep and lots of camels and lots of donkey and oxen and all sorts of things. He also had lots of children and grandchildren at the end. In the land it says there were found no women as beautiful as his daughters. He gave them an inheritance and their brothers. And after Job lived 140 years and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations, Job went to be with God. And he was old and full of days. And if God blesses us, and through grace, through Jesus Christ, He does bless us, we ought to be able to live a life without apology and with fullness, and not to leave extraordinary burdens on those who are behind us. If we die, I'm 49, I could die today. Or if I'm 109. And so what we want to encourage you to think about is how to run the race all the way through the barrier and find an inheritance in heaven, but also to leave behind blessings and not undue burdens on others around you. So that's our goal. We hope to begin to fulfill it somewhat today in this time. And you have somewhere in your packet, there's a piece of paper that has some times and some names and some topics and some blank lines on it. If you'll get that out, we've provided you a place for some notes. Now that may not be enough room for all the notes you want. The page has another side to it. It's blank on the other side. You can turn it over. Or you may have your own notebook. Many of you come prepared for these kinds of things. And so we want to bless you with these opportunities. Now, at the end of the time together at 12 o'clock, somewhere around there, we're going to serve you a lunch. And in between times, it doesn't matter if the speaker's speaking or whatever, just get up and help yourself. There's water over here, there's coffee, and there's donuts. You say, well, if I do all that, then I'll have to go to another place. Out in that hallway, if you go that way, all the way to the end to the right, there are restrooms. We debated, do we put a restroom break in here? And we decided, y'all are grown-ups, okay? Your need may not fit in the break anyway. So if you need the restroom facilities, they're in the hallway, all the way down that way, and then they'll be on the right, and you can avail yourself to it. You're a grown-up. You know how to do that. Okay? I may have left something out to get started, but I don't want to leave out prayer. We prayed about this. We believe this is something that's going to meet a much needed issue in your life, in your family's life, in the church's life. And so we're going to begin in prayer, and then after the prayer, we're going to just have a succession of our different speakers, and I'm going to introduce them all now before we have our prayer. The first speaker is going to be Dr. Gerald Colbert, who is a member of our church here, and he is going to speak in the general of having all your information in one spot and what that information is, and you have a piece of literature that may be the most valuable thing you get here today. Brother Gerald's going to speak about that. Then after Brother Gerald, my wife, and so you be real nice to the second speaker. Don't write any criticism down about the second speaker, or I'll throw it back at you. But my wife, Heather Hunt, who is a registered nurse and I would say a long history of nursing, but that makes it sound too old. But she's been a nurse for a little while, and she's done different things in nursing, including hospice nursing, and she's currently the head of the nursing program in the county school system. And so she's going to talk about some health care. It's your health care, and she's going to teach you how to, or talk to you about how to take control of it a little bit. Jerry Clements, who is CPA with Dobbs here in town, and he is going to be speaking on retirement income. Are you going to have any? What to think about if some of you already made some of those decisions. So, but some issues dealing around finances and senior adulthood. Brother Jerry's going to speak on that. And then we're happy to have the Honorable Judge Richie Parker here. I said, how am I supposed to address you, Richie? He said, just call me Richie. We grew up playing basketball against one another and different things, and best free throw shooter in the whole county ever is what we got with us. He's going to teach you how to make it when it counts. Okay, how to go through the end, and who needs a will, what are wills, what is probate, what do they do down at the probate office, and how they can help you. And so we just appreciate him being here today. And at the end, we'll have a discussion of whatever you got on your heart that maybe we haven't covered enough of. So we thank you for being here today. We're going to get started, and let's pray. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to gather. We thank you for each one who's here, some who may still be coming in. Thank you for our panel discussion that we'll have at the end, but thank you for each speaker who's going to share their heart and their knowledge with us today. And we believe, Lord, these are things that you mean to be a blessing to us and take pressure off of us so we can live by faith and live without apology, a life that would honor Christ. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Brother Gerald.
Thank you, Pastor Wesley, and thank each of you for being here today. And I want to begin by laying a little foundation for what all of us are going to be sharing. So if you'd get out this little booklet, I'm going to really tell you two stories. First story, you need to understand, I grew up in a culture some ways very similar to Calhoun, Georgia, north central Georgia, and in some ways very different. I grew up in north central Texas. My first years from 8 to 16, I attended a small church across the tracks made up primarily of blue-collar folk that worked in a textile mill. And if I heard once, I heard 100 times. How many of you ever said that? I don't know how many times. I never counted. But I heard a lot, planning ain't spiritual. Now, to say that right, you got to have water tobacco over here in the side of your mouth. You know, planning ain't spiritual. That was part of my growing up years. Well, then from the time I was 16 till I was 19 and married my wife, we attended a small rural church made up primarily of farm folk out in the country. Same culture and same phrase, planning ain't spiritual. Now, I carried that into ministry. The first church I pastored was a small rural church, north central Texas. Second church I pastored was a blue-collar church in Richmond, Indiana. And I had to start confronting some of my culture and upbringing. One of the things that got me in the most trouble in confronting my culture, I'm not going to say it was my wife, but my wife gave me a copy of the Living Bible in the early 1970s. And I got that Bible, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what's my Bible reading plan going to be this year? And I heard Dr. Billy Graham being interviewed on television, and the interviewer said, Dr. Graham, I understand that you read through your Bible every year. And Dr. Graham said, well, that has been my practice, but this year I'm doing something different. He said, this year I'm reading through the Psalms and Proverbs every month. Every day I read 5 Psalms and 1 Proverb. And I thought, well, good enough for Billy, good enough for me. And I tried that, and about 3 or 4 months into that, God's Word began to confront my culture that I'd grown up in, and this attitude that planning ain't spiritual. Turn to the inside cover of this, and I've collected some of the passages out of the Proverbs and how the wisdom of the ages teaches us to plan. Look at number 1 there from Proverbs 13:16. It says, the wise man thinks ahead. The fool doesn't, and even brags about it. If you're one of those folks that grew up like I did and you don't plan and you brag about it, God has a title for you. You can read it. Notice 16:9. We should make plans counting on God to direct us. Or 22:3. A prudent man foresees the difficulties ahead and prepares for them. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. How many of us have suffered consequences by not thinking ahead, planning ahead? And how many of you right now are even suffering consequences as you approach retirement because you didn't plan ahead? Look down a little further, and this is where this piece that I'm going to be sharing ties into this to some degree. Make plans knowing the facts. What a shame, yes, how stupid to decide before knowing the facts, Proverbs 18:13 says. You know the facts? Look at 24:3 and 4. Any enterprise is built by wise planning, becomes strong through common sense, and profits wonderfully by keeping abreast of the facts. 27:23. Watch your business interests closely. Know the state of your flocks and your herds. There's some other quotes on the back page there, but let me just stop here. Part of what this little book is about is knowing the state of your herds and flocks. As I approached retirement 10 years ago, I was working with Georgia Baptist Convention, and they had a retirement conference for those of us that were approaching retirement. And they gave us this little book. And I thought, that's interesting. And so my wife and I sat down and tried to begin to fill this thing out and discovered we had a lot of information, but it was scattered all over the place. Some of it was in this drawer, some of it was in that drawer, some was in this file cabinet. Some of it was in a safety deposit box down at the bank. And what this little book became was kind of a basket to gather our information together. And I want you to think about this little book as that kind of a thing. For some of you, this basket's going to be awfully big, and you don't need but half of what's in this book because you may only have one bank account. You may only have one credit card. Some of you are going to find that this book is a little bit too small because all the things you need to put in your basket won't fit in this little book. But it's a good place to begin to gather information together. And you never know who's going to need to pick this up tomorrow, next week, or next year. And who's going to need the information that you can collect in this little basket. So let's just kind of walk through it. On the first page there, it talks about, issue that's going to be discussed by our honorable judge here about the will, the issue of safety deposit box. You have one? Do you need one? What's going to be in there? Also, the next page on financial professionals. Well, I'll miss the first 3. I've got an insurance agent, but Jerry, I guess you're gonna have to be my accountant. I'm gonna put you down there, and put my wife down as my financial planner. But see, you need to collect these things. You may know who they are, but does the person that's going to have to pick up after you know who those folks are and where to contact them? Assets, investments. Well, I can skip all those. Down bank accounts. It's good to have that in one place. We had an experience in our family where a brother-in-law passed away, and he had bank accounts that his wife knew nothing about. It was not because he was, being secretive of it. He just opened some bank accounts and never thought to tell her about them. And she discovered these down the road a piece. So it's good to put those in place. Real estate, mortgage. How many of you know where the deed to your house is? The only reason I know is when we were filling this out, I had to figure out, okay, where is that? What box is that in? And so now it's going to be in the safety deposit box, but that's another story. See these kind of things, you think, why in the world? It's important to collect the stuff together. What about credit cards? Who knows what credit cards you have and what the standing of those are? Also, the important records. You got a place there to record where a lot of records are. Now, there's one thing that I found missing for me in this little basket. And I'm going to put an additional page in here in mine. Some of you are in the same shape I'm in. When I was a young person, I had one doctor, Dr. Charlie Wysong. He'd been my doctor from the time I was 8 years old. He had delivered my wife. He delivered our daughter, our first daughter. But when I retired, I had a general practitioner, I had an orthopedic, I had a dermatologist, and I had a cardiologist, that's right. When we filled this thing out 10 years ago, and then dug it out about 5 months ago, I was amazed at how many things had changed. How many account numbers had changed, credit card numbers had changed, and also how many doctors had changed. When we moved up here to Calhoun, I decided to keep my cardiologist, but guess what? He retired. I decided to keep my urologist. He died. I kept my dermatologist. He retired. So now I've got new doctors and numbers I need to add to this. That's just another piece of the basket that you need to put together. And so again, I just want to say to you, think of this as a little basket. If it fits what you're doing and where you are, fantastic. If you need to add pages to it, great, do that. One last thing, as I filled mine out and got my basket full, I happened to think, this stuff changes often. So I went on the computer and put all this information from here. I collected it here and put it on the computer in a special file. I'm going to put that file on a thumb drive, and that's going to go in the safety deposit box at the bank. So that whenever somebody else gets this later on down the road, if this has changed some, I'll update this every year on New Year's Day. That's on my to-do list for New Year's. Thank you. Heather, give you 5 more minutes.
I want to thank Michael Moore before we start for always helping me with any of the presentations that we do at church. And also take the opportunity to invite the women to come to our Bible study on Wednesday nights. We are in the book of Jeremiah. We will be in chapter 21 this week. So, we're going to talk just briefly about dealing with end-of-life care, and that's something that none of us like to think about, but it's something that can happen, acutely, spur of the moment, or it can be something that happens after a chronic or a long-term illness. So I want to start by reading a verse from Psalm 90:12. So teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. And, each of us have value in our days. Am I too close to this microphone? Okay. And we should always just be diligent in how we use that time. We want to use it to honor God. We want to use it to do His will for our lives and what He wants us to do for others. So the things that we need to think about and we need to consider when we are determining these end-of-life goals that we have for ourselves are quality of life. What kind of life do we want to have? Quantity of life, and that can be determined by a number of factors. Our financial concerns and the burden of care that we will place on those that we entrust to take care of us. So our main issues in our decisions are going to be quality versus quantity, and that's, people want to live a long time, but we also need to consider as we make these end-of-life decisions, are we truly concerned more about the quality of life that we have or just about the quantity? And I would encourage you, as Gerald mentioned, in terms of the booklet, communication is going to be the key in terms of the people that you've entrusted to care for you, not only your family, but your friends and your doctors. So communication is going to be the key. Documentation is going to be so important. There are several means of documentation to accomplish what you want for yourselves, because unless you want other people to make decisions for you when the time comes that you can no longer make decisions for yourselves, you need to have those decisions outlined. One of the things that you can have is a living will. I'm sure when you go to the hospital or the doctor's office, they'll say, do you have a living will, also known as an advance directive? You can also have what's called a durable power of attorney for health care, and some people even make a video. And I know that most recently in the situation in our family, my dad did not have a living will, and a video was a key thing that we had to incorporate into his plan of care at the end of his life. So in a living will, that is going to specifically address resuscitation. Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want them to do CPR? Do you want health providers to shock you? That sort of thing. Mechanical ventilation. Do you want to be placed on a breathing machine? And with COVID, we hear this term more frequently. Oh, they're on the vent, right? We hear that every day. Oh, they're going on the vent. Well, that's mechanical ventilation. That's a machine that breathes for you. So in your living will, you can make that determination. In the event that I can't breathe for myself, do I want to have mechanical ventilation? Artificial nutrition. If you get to the point where you can no longer eat, do you want a tube feeding? All of these things are things that are line itemed in a living will. Do you want dialysis? Yes or no? Palliative care and pain management are those things that I want to consider at the end of my life. And even things like organ donation, which, we all have that checked. Some of us have that checked on our license, but that can also be addressed in a living will, among other things. These are just the highlights. A durable power of attorney for health care is a person, also known as an agent, that you choose to make the medical decisions for you if you're unable to make those for yourself. So as long as you're coherent, you're making your decisions, you just have this person as a backup. There's no need for them to be involved in your care in terms of the actual decisions that you make. Of course, you may want them to be there with you so that they know what you are telling the healthcare providers. Also, the durable power of attorney for healthcare cannot be your physician or a healthcare provider who is involved in your care. And this would apply to medical decisions only. This is not going to be someone who is going to make financial decisions for you. This is strictly regarding your medical decisions. So, Gerald also pointed on this. When you do these forms, you need to make sure that you keep the originals in a secure location. You need to share a copy with your healthcare provider, the hospital. You need to share a copy with your durable power of attorney for healthcare. And you need to make your wishes known to your family, because in the event that you choose a friend to be your durable power of attorney for healthcare, you may have family members who come in and say, oh no, that's not what we're going to do. So you need to make sure that you are communicating your wishes with everyone in your family. Because I can tell you, the squeaky wheel is going to be the one that's heard in the hospitals. So you need to have someone who is going to be your advocate when you can no longer make decisions for yourself. I want to speak briefly on a DNR. A DNR is an order. It's a physician's order, and it's a do not resuscitate order. So this is an order that your physician would write either when you're on hospice, of course, or as you go into the hospital. And it is just your code status. So if something happened to you while you were at the hospital, this is a directive from your physician on what the staff at the hospital should do. This is an order that must be written upon each entry to the hospital. So if you are in the hospital and you say, no, I want to be a DNR, and you go home and you come back and that order is not reinstated, then if something happened to you, everyone, on staff at the hospital would consider you what's called a full code. And unless you have the order, you're going to go through the CPR and the mechanical ventilation and all of that. So you need to have your living will on file with the hospital, and you need to communicate to your physician if you have requested that you do not resuscitate. In terms of self-care deficits, nobody likes to think about when you get to the point that you can no longer care for yourself. But what do? I'm sure it's within all of us that we want to stay in our homes. That's the place where we have lived, we've raised our families. But you have to think about some things when you're there and you're making that decision. Number one, is it safe? Is it safe for you to stay by yourself or even with family? Is it accessible? Are you able to get from floor to floor if you have multiple levels? Are you able to get in and out of your bathroom or into the house if you're using a walker or a wheelchair? And is it feasible? So, is it financially feasible for you to stay at home? Some of the things that will assist you in home care would be your family. You have to think about the burden of care. That's what needs to start going through your mind now. If I'm going to stay at home, what will the burden of care be for my family, my sitters? Do I even have money to pay for sitters? Am I going to qualify for home health? Am I going to qualify for hospice care? But you also have to understand that home health and hospice care will not be services that will be there with you 24/7 for the most part. Your family and your sitters will have that burden. Another option that people have as they get to the place where they are no longer able to care for themselves independently is an assisted living center, and admittance to that facility will be determined based on your mobility status. What are you able to do in terms of getting around? Your mental status, and then also your financial status, because these places are not free. And that's one of the things that you can consider in terms of your financial planning. Other options, short-term rehab or skilled nursing facilities if you are in the hospital and you need a little bit of help, but you have plans to go back home. Those could be options. Long-term care facilities, like nursing homes where people stay for the remainder of their lives and that becomes their home, or end of life care in the last days or weeks in an inpatient hospice center. All of these other options, though, just as a reminder, will be based on your insurance plans, your finances, and your health situations. So another reason just to be very diligent in your planning. So the question that I would like for you to have, circling through your mind as you make all of these decisions, if you had the choice, would you die at home or in a hospital or nursing home? And based on your answer to that question, now is the time for you to start making those decisions and making those plans to allow you to die at home or to die in a hospital or a nursing home.
Everybody's been brief. It's hard to catch everything you need to catch, isn't it? We can thank us for having places for us to make notes and stuff. That's been good. I like to write poems and stuff, and I'm gonna write a song one of these days. If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, make a young, rich, ugly woman your wife. And I'll get Judge Parker to set that to a tune maybe for me there. That would help out in old age. And some of you, oh, okay. And some of you men, just looking around, you can look over and squeeze your wife's hand and say, honey, I already blew it. Because you ladies too pretty to fit that description. What I'm going to talk to you about is some of the financial needs that you have in older age and how you come to those. Some of you younger people might benefit a little bit more of the first part I've got here. Maximizing your Social Security is one thing you want to do. The main retirement that most people have in life is Social Security, so you'd like to maximize that. Right now, if you're 66 years of age, you reach your retirement age. Used to be 65. We've ingrained that in our society pretty much. But you can wait, and you can not take that until you're 70 years of age if you're healthy and you can work, and you want to do that. An example of that would be if you retired at 66, you could get, and this depends on what your income was, and let's say you were drawing a benefit, and this is just an example of $25,000 a year. You can add to that about $2,000 a year if you'll wait. Every year you wait adds $2,000 a year to what you'd get. So if you waited till you're 70 years old, you'd draw $33,000. That's a difference of $8,000 a year, which makes a good difference for you when you get to retirement. And that's the main income that you've got. Now, drawing your retirement out of retirement accounts becomes important. Think about this. If you take your Social Security out and it becomes taxable, 85% of it becomes taxable, and you have to pay tax on that. For an individual person, it'd be $25,000 a year. If your adjusted gross income is over that, then you have to pay on Social Security, and Social Security is also counted in that. $35,000 if you're a married couple. So kind of put that on hold in your brain just a second and go to, if you've got a 401k or IRA, what you'd like to do is use that money first. Draw it out instead of making your Social Security taxable. You say, well, I'm counting on that to be my retirement. You can take it out of the retirement. You don't have to spend it. You can put it over into another account just like the one you've already got and earn money on that. Once you get now 72 years of age, you have to draw money out of your retirement, and it's called required minimum distribution is the phrase that they'll use on that. You have to draw that money out of the retirement. Think about this. if you've got a standard deduction that you're using, a little over $13,000 for an individual, $26,000 for a married couple, you want to maximize that against your 401k or your IRA. So what you would do, if you say, hey, my income is below that and I'm not drawing anything out because I'm preserving that IRA, you're not doing real well. You need to draw that money out, get it in the zero bracket if you can, and not pay any taxes on that. I was able to do that with my mother. My mother retired, had some money in it went from her retirement. They didn't want her to keep it in it, shifted it over into her IRA, then took it out under her standard deduction. She didn't have to pay any taxes on that, so it helped Mama out as she came along. A lot of people like to talk you into buying annuities. I'm not a fan of annuities because in an annuity you pay it in and they give you so much per month. If you're a poor money manager, that's probably a good idea. But if you're a pretty good money manager, or your wife is, or your husband is, then I don't really recommend putting your money into an annuity. Say you want to buy a car. Well, you're going to have to put it on payments with a bank and finance that if you've got your money tied up in annuities. I won't go into a lot of detail on that because I'd rather save time, but annuities sometimes is not a real good thing, but a financial planner will try to talk you into it real quickly. Judge Parker was talking a while ago about downsizing. He and his wife would like to downsize. I think that's a smart thing to do as you get older. One of the things that Heather talked about was, do you want to continue living on in your home? Most of us do, but it's a hard decision. But if you downsize, you're going to save money on maintenance, you're going to save it on taxes, you're going to save it on insurance, and you're going to save it on utilities. Now, be careful when you're choosing your next home because you want it on one floor. When me and my wife got married, we decided we were going to plan for the future, and we had a one floor house. There's no upstairs, there's no downstairs. That was thinking ahead to the time we were going to retire. I made it, but she didn't, bless her heart. And when you sell your personal residence, if you've lived in it 2 years out of the last 5, then you can exclude $250,000 each. Married couple, $500,000. Let's say you gave $100,000 for your home, you sell it for $350,000. If it was me, I'm single, I wouldn't have to pay any taxes. You and your wife, you pay $100,000 for a home, you sell it for $600,000, you can exclude $500,000. You don't have to pay any taxes on that. You have to live in it 2 out of the last 5 years. If you go into a nursing home, as Heather was speaking about there's a 5-year look back. So if you own property and stuff, you're not going to be able to go on to Medicaid and let the government pick up the tab on that without the home becoming as part of the collateral on that. You can use your Social Security to help offset the cost of a nursing home. But if you don't have any assets and you go on Medicaid, you have to hold your cash under $2,000. That's a hard thing to do because you got to have that. You got to be able to pay any medical expenses that you've got in that $2,000, and they look at that every year. So it's a hard little juggling act to follow. There's 2 kind of taxes. One's you fill out a Form 706, you got to have $11,700,000 to have to pay any taxes right now. And there's a word called portability. So if you're a husband and wife both alive right now, that doubles that to $23,400,000. And so you probably say, hey, Jerry, I ain't got no problem with that one. But the other one is, just like you fill out a 1040 form, you have to fill out a 1041 if you have over $600 in income. So let's say I were to die and my family didn't take my money out of the estate name. The estate would have to pay taxes on anything on interest and dividends that was drawn over $600, and those tax rates are pretty quick and pretty high. And then the next thing you have to worry about is what are you going to do when you retire. Decide early as you can and try to experience some of that the best you can to see if you really like what you're doing in retirement. Insurance is always a problem for people who are going to retire if they're going to retire before they get retirement age, because Medicare kicks in at 65. You'd have to have a supplement. You'd have to have a medicine supplement also. Quality of life, like Heather says, is your goal after you retire. Something else you need to watch, and watch this real closely, is do you have bank overdraft protection? If you overdraw your account, they charge $35 bank fee. To get out of that, sometimes people tie that into a savings account, and what you just did, if you're not careful, is if somebody steals your identity and takes your funds, they're going to draw out of your savings account after they get the checking account. So talk to your banker, make sure you're okay on that, and be careful. I'd rather pay $35 and then take all my savings. So y'all do it any way y'all want to do. The rich pay taxes, they say, and get around paying taxes. That's a political lie. It's not true. And every time somebody's running for office, they'll say that on the national level. And then the news media will back them up. It's not true. The top 1%, this is 2018 statistics. The top 1% of income producers produce 21% of the income. They get 21% of the income. They pay 40% of the taxes. The top 10% of income producers get 48% of the income, and they pay 71% of the taxes. 61 are from 47 to 61. I can't find a good figure on this, of people in the lower income tax bracket doesn't pay any taxes, and part of them get back more than they pay in. Social Security's going broke. You've heard that one. That's really a lie too. Back in Lyndon Baines Johnson's time, they took the Social Security fund, put it in the National Treasury. There's only one. If they say Social Security's going broke, that means the whole United States is going broke. What they're talking about is money is not being paid into the system as quickly as it's being taken out. In other words, they'd have to pull from other sources to be able to keep up with Social Security. They're not going to do that. That's too politically unpalatable for them. Thank y'all for listening. I know I threw a lot at you in a quick period of time, and I appreciate you listening.
I'm not going to have enough, everybody. I got to put myself on a clock because I tend to ramble a little bit. So, we got 20 minutes extra. Don't say that now. Do you? Well, but at the same time, I don't want to. I'll let them hand those things out. The food smells good, so y'all might not want to have any ramblings and rabbit trails involved in this. So, let them just distribute out, and feel free to make copies of this if you need a copy. I know everybody's probably not going to be in a position to be able to look at your neighbor's copy or whatever, but obviously feel free to share that with one another. Please do. But if you want copies, I'm sure you guys have a good copy machine here. Can make some copies. But I will say in advance, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how many people would be here, and it's great to see such a good number of folks here. Many of you I know, some of you I do not know, and I appreciate the kind words, Brother Wesley, and I appreciate the presentations because in listening, and Brother Gerald, I don't know where he went, I'm going to adopt your booklet and some information in that, because a lot of times people come to my office and they go, well, I know Mom or Dad had a will. Is it here in your office? Well, in most cases, most people don't bring wills for storage in my office, but people tend to think that that's just where they are. And in most cases, they're not. And so, we look and see and they're not. Well, I know they had it somewhere. Funny story, we had some folks, they came to see me and said, well, I know Dad made a will and we can't find it. Is it in your office? No, I looked, it wasn't there. I says, well, does he have a file cabinet at home, or does he have a place where he might keep important documents, insurance documents, or other things? I said, the S10. I said, the S10. You talking about a truck, the S10? He said, yeah, so truck. It hadn't ran for years, and Dad's had it in the garage forever, and he keeps all his important documents in the glove box of the truck. I said, hey, it's worth a shot. So they go home. They lived in Fairmount. They go home. They come back, and here it is. It was in it along with a bunch of other stuff. Hey, can you look through this and see? But literally, he kept that will in the glove box of his truck, his old truck that had not run for years. So in looking at the booklet that was given out, I like that a lot, because that gives information that you can put in the hands of your children or whoever, the trusted person you want to know that information, and it gives the location of that important stuff. So that's a very good piece of information. And everything that's been presented here today really ties into what I do, from the medical preparation. Just in general, being prepared where people know where your stuff is. They know what to do. They know about your accounts, because most people come in to do a probate. They have no clue. I wouldn't have a clue of my parents' financial situation. I wouldn't even know where to find stuff if I went to look for it. So, and then just with the information that Jerry presented, and just to say, as a side note, there's a place in there where it says you can list your attorney. I know a very good attorney with the same last name, Jeff Clements, just Jerry's son. I gotta bring this up. You want to talk about a fine fella and a great attorney? I use him. I'll say that I use him a lot. He's also my county administrator, so when I have a situation where an estate is unrepresented, Jeff is my go-to guy. He takes on the weird and unusual stuff, and he figures it out. Really smart guy. I'll pitch him because he really is. I pitch other. We got a great attorney resource here in Gordon County. We're very blessed in that capacity. So if you need to see an attorney, Gordon County is a good place to see an attorney. Well, what you have here, you got some information. You've got requirements of what it takes to make a will. I'm not going to go into all the probate details. We'd be here for 3 or 4 days just talking about what it takes to probate a will, all the complexities that could come into that. What I want to present to you today is just a simple example of a will. And you'll notice on top of the second page that you got at the beginning of the stapled page is that this will, or this document, is intended for instructional purposes. So as a judge, I can't give legal advice. We can't sit and tell you, everything you need to do regarding your estate or your will construction or any of that stuff. But I wanted to give you an example today but at the same time make reference to the fact that I'm not giving legal advice. I'm not providing legal advice, but it is something that to help instruct you. So before we get started, I just want to ask you by a show of hands, how many of you have a will? Okay, well, that concludes my presentation. I mean, we got about everybody covered. Just talk to those folks who have one. They can tell you about it. Well, those of you who have a will, how many of you had an attorney draft your will? How many did not? Okay, all right. So more so had an attorney draft their will than did not. I will say up front, regardless of anything that I say ongoing, it is a wise thing to have an attorney draft your will for a variety of reasons, and I'll get into these in a moment as to why it's very important once we start looking at what the requirements are. It's really important for the construction, the language contained in the will, but also to make sure of some things that we're going to talk about later that could come up if someone contested your will. You want to have folks who validly assessed your situation, who can attest to your mental capacity, who can attest to whether or not you were influenced by somebody else, somebody who would be willing to get on the stand, because let's look at it. As it is, if it's your will, who's the best witness as to whether or not you knew you made this will validly? Well, it would be you and me. If we made our will, we're no longer here. We're living in our mansion in the sky. We're not worried about what's going on with our will at this point, but somebody's going to have to deal with it. So it's good to cover those bases. Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Now, if we think about that, we'll say a good man. Well, not good in heart. I mean, there's some really good-hearted people. Like myself, I got a good heart, but I'm poor. So I may not have anything to leave to my own children, much less to their children, but I should certainly prepare and try. I think that is what that verse is trying to tell us, that in being a prudent person, in looking toward people other than ourselves, I think that it is very unselfish of us to think about those who are going to go on after us, and that not only being the generation after us, but the one after them. So the Bible, I feel, is instructing us there in Proverbs to try and prepare for that, and I think that that's a good word. I think that's a good thing to focus on. I'm just going to jump into the requirements. The first page that you have here says requirements of a valid last will and testament under Georgia law. So I want you to take that page, put it beside this document that I have entitled The Last Will and Testament of Wesley Hunt. Now, I just want to go ahead and say it. Jeff Clements drew this for... No, he didn't. He did not do that. But as we look at this, as we look at these requirements, I want to reference this will at the same time. The first thing that you'll notice on the requirements page is that the person who is creating a will, they're referred to as the testator. All right, that's one of those legal terms, and I want to reference you to, if you flip back beyond the will that's stapled there, there are definitions. Now, I entitled this Definitions of Weird Legal Looking Words That Otherwise Should Just Say What They Mean in Language I Can Understand. Okay, so you're going to come across some words as we go down through here, and I'll try to define those, but I attach this to you, or to this will for your reference later on, so that when you're reading down through here, you go, gosh, what does that mean? Well, more than likely, I've defined it on that last page. But when we look at this document, the first requirement under Georgia law is that someone be 14 years old to create, or at least 14 years old to create a will. I've not encountered that. Most of the wills that I encounter are either, wills, folks like me who've gotten on in age and decide they need to create a document, their last will and testament, or folks who might be younger, who are facing a possible terminal illness. But I I've never seen a will for anyone of that age, but they're able to do that. So I think Wesley's got this one covered here. You said 49, you're a couple years beyond that. So the second thing, it says that the person creating the will is competent to create his or her will. Now, my wife might, if I drew a will today, my wife might question, depending on what I put in that will, as to whether or not I was competent to make that will. But for a will to be valid in Georgia, one must represent themselves as having proper mental capacity, and that they're doing what they're doing freely and voluntarily, that nobody's unduly influencing them, that they're able to come before whoever is drawing that will and that person be able to attest to the fact that, hey, they knew what they were doing. Number 3, the will must be a written document. We see in movies a lot of times, they have the gathering of the family and they put it up on the video screen, and there's Dad, and he's talking about little Jimmy, how he's giving him everything in life, and he's not getting anything, and you're cut out, bud. You just may as well not even be here. And Susie over here, though, she did everything for me, and you know what, Susie, I want you to have everything. That causes a big uproar. Well, that's dramatized, obviously, and I'm not even sure if those type situations occur in other states. Maybe they do. But in Georgia, it must be a written document. It can be typed like this one. It can be handwritten. It can be on a white piece of paper. It can be on a yellow legal pad. It can be on a napkin. But as long as it meets the requirements and the other requirements that we're going to talk about, as long as it is written and meets the other requirements, it can be considered for probate in Georgia. The next thing, the will is signed by the testator. Again, we reference that term. Testator is the person who creates the will. In this case, Wesley is the testator, and he signs that. He does that. He signs that in front of 2 witnesses. There must be 2 witnesses to the signature of the testator. Those witnesses must watch the testator sign this document, and they sign in a attestation that he or she did sign that will. Now, again, going back to the witness situation, the reference to having an attorney draw your will. A lot of times when you go and have a will created in an attorney's office, or the attorney comes to you, he or she, they're going to assess your capacity. There'll be some questions that we would be asked in that situation as to date and time, and what day of the week it is, and who's the president, and so on and so forth, and also ask questions to that reference whether or not one was influenced outside of their own free and voluntary decision making. And usually they're going to put witnesses in there who are going to listen to all of this, and they're going to say, hey, do you feel good about witnessing this signature? This person has this will. Do you want to sign it, ma'am? Do you want to sign it, sir? Yep, I'm good with that. Do you want to witness it? Yes, I feel good about witnessing that. Because probably the most common caveat that I have in will contests is mental capacity. Because if someone's going to contest a will, they come and they say, well, Daddy wasn't in his right mind, or Mama didn't know what she was doing. And the most very important pieces in a contested will that the defending attorney or the person defending the case would have is that, hey, we had these people in the room. They saw, or they heard, or they witnessed what was taking place. And though in most cases they're not considered expert witnesses, but they're the only witnesses we have to that particular event. And they're very good witnesses, because it's very difficult to disprove a will that meets the requirements under Georgia law. It takes a whole lot more evidence to disprove a will than it does to prove one, at least in my experience, I'll say that. So the 2 witnesses that witness one's will, those are very important pieces of the puzzle there. So the last thing, though I did not put it as a requirement, but you'll notice the last page of Wesley's will here is called a self-proving affidavit. Now you notice we have on this last part, we've got Wesley's signature forged nonetheless, but hey, it's all right. In this case, for instructional purposes, which, by the way, a forgery is the second most common caveat that I see in will contests, is that people try to say that it was forged. I did have a will contest where had a wife bring in a will to probate of her husband. Cut one of the daughters out of the will. She comes and brings me this. She says it was the real will that her dad had. It actually read like a story, and it told the story of why she should get everything and why he should cut everybody else out. And it was actually an interesting story, but it wasn't a will. But the funny part of it was that she had scribbled some kind of signature, kind of like I did with Wesley here, and had listed witnesses, and she had a notary with a notary. So I'm thinking, dang. Well, the interesting part is I knew one of the witnesses very well, and I knew the person who worked at the bank who supposedly notarized this affidavit. So it's pretty easy for me to go to them and go, hey, did you witness this thing? And then they're like, no, we didn't. I have no idea. So I brought the lady in and said, look, I've got two people who will go on the stand and say they didn't witness this thing. If you don't want me to present you to the DA's office for a potential forgery, you might consider withdrawing this. So she did. So it was pretty easy sell. But if you notice here on this affidavit, we've got Wesley's signature. We've got Elvis Presley IV as a witness. Judas Iscariot the 20th also as a witness, and is notarized by Billy Bob Thornton. Well, probably not great witnesses, and not sure Billy Bob Thornton's come out of his acting career to be a notary public, but either way, that's an example of what a self-proven affidavit is. And what it does, it simply brings everything together. It says, hey, I saw Wesley sign this thing. I saw Elvis sign this thing. I saw Judas sign this thing. I'm going to put my notary seal on here, and it makes the process go along faster. Now, that's once you get into the probate process. We're not going to get into all of that. Again, we could be here for days. But what I'm talking about is what creates a valid will. Now, again, there's a lot of stuff in between there. In a will, Wesley's named an executor. He names his wife. He names an alternate executor, his brother. Those are trusted people in his life. And I think that it's important to recognize those people who you trust. And like this document says that Brother Gerald brought out, I think it's a great document. I'm going to steal it, if that's all right. Okay, you weren't in the room. But that is something that someone should have and indicate who your executor is, and your executor should know where your will is. That's very important, and have access to the original will. The other thing this will does in the second paragraph, it identifies Wesley's bounty, his people, his heirs, the nature of his bounty. Now in here you'll notice he lists some people that I would like for him to include in his will. It's the names of my kids. So anyway, we didn't list his own child in here, but I did that to be comical, but at the same time to let you know that heirs and beneficiaries are not always the same. You can leave whoever, whatever, in your will to receive as a beneficiary, but you recognize the nature of your bounty in your will. I think that that's very important. Not necessary to validate your will, but very important that you list your wife and children or whoever those next of kin are that you would put in your will. There are a lot of other terms in here that you may run across, and I've defined them on that page. I don't want to carry on too long, but just focus you on item 6, which references a particular code that comes out of the official code of Georgia, annotated section 5312-261, which in most wills we see, which grants full power to an executor to basically be able to carry forth the terms of the will without having to come to the court for everything that they want to do. They need to sell a house, or they need to do something with an investment property, or whatever. They can do so carrying out the terms of the will without having to come back to me and say, Judge, I need to do this, What do I need to do? Because if it doesn't grant those powers in the will, they have to have a surety bond, have to file inventory, and have to do so many things just to get to the end result of the probate. This relieves them of that and allows them full power to be able to accomplish that without having to come back to the court every time and ask. For the most part, that gives you a good groundwork. Again, just disclaimer, the court can't give you legal advice. Seek legal advice from an attorney. A good attorney, will give you proper legal advice. And however, I will say this. In probate court in Gordon County, we're open to you. My door is always open. I tell people this all the time. If you don't like people, you would hate my job, because pretty much every day what I do is talk to people about a variety of things. We do a lot of things in our probate court. Won't get into all that. Most of the questions I get are about carrying permits. So I go talk to a group of people. They want to know about firearm carrying permits. That's not what we're talking about today. But I'll be glad to answer any question that you have. If it's a question that I can answer outside of giving legal advice, and I welcome you to come visit us anytime. We'll be glad to help you any way we can. And obviously, we're going to field some questions here in a moment. But I appreciate your time. And again, if you need me for anything, please don't hesitate to call or come see me. Thank you.
As we started, I said we would not take a break, but I realized it's going to be helpful to me if you will write down your questions and give me about 5 minutes to sort through them. And that might give you, if you haven't taken a restroom break, if you want to take one, there's still coffee, there's still donuts, there's still water. And but if you have a question, remember there's a card in your packet. These people, they were just hitting highlights, and you say, boy, they didn't answer what I thought I might need to know. Now, if you're going, we can't answer something so specific that it looks like legal advice or financial advice or health advice, but if it's we want to answer as many questions as we can. So Gerald's walking around taking up cards, and I know y'all got to have some questions, so y'all quit shaking your head no when he comes by, or else I'm just going to ask all the questions. But if you need to take a quick break or get some water or coffee or a donut, give us just about 5 minutes. Somebody has an answer, then you can just say, hey, let me say something. One of these, or a couple of these have to do with changing my will so that someone's responsible for medical decisions. I want to make sure people understand, if you have medical decision things, they don't belong in your will, okay? Because they won't dig your will out to look at it until after you've passed, okay? Because everybody's rooting for you to make it. So there's a difference between a living will and a will. And we've kind of thrown those things around. Heather, do you want to talk about a living will or say something about it?
The living will will specifically address.
And how do you make a living will?
Well, you can make a living will through a lawyer, of course, but also through the hospital can provide you copies of that. You can go through an online will assisting tool, but those decisions on the living will be specific to medical decisions. They'll have nothing to do with finances and that sort of thing. So it would address the things that were in that slide, like resuscitation, mechanical ventilation.
Okay, what about power of attorney for health care? How do you get that made?
Same way. You can have a lawyer do that, or you can go through an online assisting tool. The hospital could provide you copies also of a form that you could complete.
And if you filled out one before, how do you change it?
Just like you would change any other legal document, you would have to go through the process of changing the wordage or the verbiage on that document, and then have your witnesses and a notary.
And that's a separate document than the will that Judge Parker was talking about. This may be generally, Jerry, what are your thoughts for people on Roth versus traditional IRAs and 401ks? And jump on that.
Okay, a Roth, you don't have to pay taxes on when you draw it out, but you get no deduction for it when you pay it in. So, if you have, a pretty good income, you'd be better off taking a regular IRA. If you have lower income, you'd go with a Roth. A Roth does not have to have required minimum distributions. So when you get 72 now, you would not have to take a required minimum distribution. You could just keep it a little bit later on. So it depends on your financial condition and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to avoid taxes, do a regular. If you're comfortable with not taking the deduction in the year that you put it in, then you'd get a Roth and let it grow tax-free in it. But every what you take out of a regular IRA, even though it's the interest that earned after you put it in there, is taxable when you take it out.
Thank you, Jerry. That was something I didn't know about, not having to take a minimum distribution on a Roth at 72. So that's interesting. Now, all these questions and answers, consult your accountant and your financial advisor on what's right for you as you sort through those things. Same person, has a question on if someone is an executor of a will, is there a time limit and how long they have to perform those duties?
The answer is no, not necessarily. There are some instances where wills are created and they're never probated because in life someone went ahead and created situations to where they didn't need to probate a will to get that information or the assets, I should say, over to someone else. So they may have created a will, let's say when they were 50, but between the ages of 50 and whenever they, 100 or whenever they pass away, they went ahead and deeded their property to someone, or they created a right of survivorship deed. That's something that can transfer upon death, kind of like a life insurance policy. Or they made all their accounts pay on death accounts, or they went ahead and just gave their stuff away. My dad used to have it, people would ask him questions. He was in my office for 28 years. And they would ask him, say, what's the easiest way to deal with your probate situation, or to make sure that everybody gets, what they're going to get? How can I assure that's going to happen? He says, go ahead and give it to them. So you don't have anything, there's nothing for anybody to fight over, or nothing for anybody to have to go through, in probate.
Well, let me make sure people understand. So I've got that S10 in the garage.
Yeah.
I'm that guy.
Yeah.
But on the title it's transferred to grandson Bobby or whatever. But in my will it said it went to cousin Joe. Whose is it when I die?
Well, and going back to the original question, I know I'm kind of straight off from that, but there's not necessarily a designated time frame. The law just indicates that it should be probated in a reasonable time frame. Well, that's subject to discretion. Reasonable to me might not be reasonable to you. So it should be brought forward for probate, or it should be brought forward for recording in the court called not for probate. Sometimes there are situations where they say, there's nothing for us to do. What do we do with this will? Well, you can bring it to us. We can record it not for probate. And if anything crops up, you know where it is, it's here, then you can go forward with a probate, or it makes it access to the public, to anybody else. Once a will is placed on file either for probate or not for probate, it becomes a public record. So someone can access that record and they can say, well, hey, you know what? I believe Uncle Joe owned this or that or the other. I believe this will needs to be probated. So there are other processes, other petitions that can be filed that can prompt that will for probate at that point. But there's not an actual designated time for somebody, for an executor, to offer a will for probate.
And kind of getting what he was saying too, if you've already given those assets away, so you've already signed over the title to your classic car, but it was in the will that it was going to somebody later, well, that has no bearing legally because it's already legally transferred. And I know a lot of things. This is a funny example. When my father-in-law passed away, his will was older And if you went by the thing it said legally, is Heather and I'd be responsible for my brother-in-law. You know, she was supposed to be the caretaker for her brother in the event of her dad's passing. Well, her brother's 40-something years old. So, I mean, that obviously was an old clause. It was outdated by practicality and by life. So, this is another reason to keep it updated. But especially, if you want stuff to get to who you want it to go to, go ahead and give it away and process that legally. Now, Judge, one more, just a simple definition of probate. So throw that around. What does even probate mean?
All right. Probate in this, in the sense of a state definition, means to prove. Probate means to prove. So a lot of people think that, okay, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, I've got this will and I went down there to the bank and doggone it, they won't let me get the money out of the bank. What in the world? What good is this will? Well, it has to go through the probate process, and part of the probate process, well, the probate process includes a petition to probate a will. In Georgia, fortunately, we process what's called standard forms. You can go on to gaprobate.gov. I should have referenced that in our stuff, but again, it's hard for me to think through everything. You can go on to gaprobate.gov, and you go under a tab that says standard forms, and if you want to write this down or you don't get it, I'll be glad to go back through that. But you go to the standard forms tab, and it gives you a whole list of documents that are petitions that can be filed in probate court. Not all courts publish those kind of things. But the reason probate courts do it in Georgia is because we have so many what's called pro se petitioners, those who come before the court without being represented by an attorney. So somebody long ago thought, well, you know what, we go through trying to explain all this stuff. Let's just publish these petitions and folks can go and download these petitions, fill them out, and bring them to the court. So part of probating a will is to file that petition. What's included in that petition is a list of heirs at law. Now again, going back to heirs at law versus beneficiaries, in your will, you can name me as your beneficiary and me be no relation to you. You can give me all your stuff. But you know who has to know about that and who has to be served with that information are your heirs at law. So in this case, Wesley, in his will, has a wife and my 8 children. So they would all have to be notified that this is taking place. So the executor offers the will and that petition, and then those people are notified, and they say, you know, here it is. If you've got any objection to it, you know, you need to object, or, you know, within a certain time frame. If not, don't do anything. Or if you're in agreement with it, there's an acknowledgement page in the petition that they can sign. And what that does is it indicates to the court what the court's next action is supposed to be. So if somebody contests the will, obviously there's going to be a hearing to determine whether or not that contest is valid, to determine whether or not that will should be accepted for probate. So the burden falls on the petitioner to prove that that is a valid will, subject to the objections, you know, that are being offered. If people are served and they're given 30 days to respond and they do nothing at all, that order is signed, they're considering service, nobody has any objection, the will is proven. At that point, order signed, we bring the executor in and get them on and get their letters to them. If everybody signs the acknowledgement page, it obviously moves it along faster. So whoever the heirs at law are, again, regardless of whether or not they're left as beneficiaries in the will. And I explain that to people, and they go, well, I still don't see why that should be. You know, this will is this will. I said, well, consider this. If you didn't have to prove this will, and somebody could just draft a document, much like what I did today, and God forbid something happened to Wesley, and I bring this document and say, well, here it is. Heather, too bad. You know what? This is what you're going to have to go by. Well, obviously, she could look at that and know that it wasn't proper, and knows that it's a forgery, and knows that somebody else drew that. But if I could just take that document and go to the bank or whatever, and just because I had this will or this document without having proven it, or probated, offered it to the court, served it out on the heirs, give everybody who was an eligible person to review that, to look at, then I can tell you, I'd be seeing 10 different wills on the same person probably all the time. They just find the richest person in Gordon County and say, you know what, I'm just going to draw a will and leave everything to myself. So that's why that has to be done, and that's what that means.
Just stay right there.
Okay.
I think that you may have covered this, but if the real will is written and it's notarized, is it legal?
Yeah, handwritten wills, again, it must be written, either typed or handwritten. But notarized, simply notarized, no, that does not qualify as a valid will. It must be signed by the testator. It must have 2 witnesses who watched him sign with their signatures on there. We got Elvis and Judas who watched him sign that. Then where the notary would come in, again, the notary is not required, but it is certainly helpful. That self-proving affidavit, not just the notary seal, but the self-proving affidavit, which is the last page of that will, which basically says, I'm attesting to these signatures, everybody's attesting to these signatures, we're all here, we're all good with it, here's my seal, I feel good about it, I've witnessed everybody's signature. So looking at that first page I gave you, the requirement, the very basic requirements of a legal will in Georgia, very important information, and it references the law, so you can actually go online. It's real easy to research. You don't have to go to a law library or anything now. You can Google it, and it'll pull it right up for you. That gives you all the legal reference to that information.
Can you have co-executors, 2 executors serving at the same time?
You can. I see that every now and then.
Is it wise?
Well, I'm not going to say it's wise or it's not. It depends on the situation. But I will say this. Co-executors, co-administrators, co-guardians, the problem with that is a lot of people think it's either or. Well, I'm going to name Jamie and Heather as co-executors instead of naming Heather, and then if she can't do it, naming Jamie. If you name co-executors, in a lot of instances, anything that you do, it's going to be required for both of those people to signify it. So, you know, it's not going to be, well, Heather couldn't be here, so Jamie, why don't you go up there and do that? You go to the bank, they're going to require both signatures because you're considered one and the same. So it's not an either or situation. So is it wise? Depends on the situation, I guess. But
I think I can answer this one. Should you include your wishes for the care of children or dependent minors in your will? And I would say the answer to that would be probably. I mean, unless you want people fighting that out. If you have a determination already that you want to take care of
that
your
wasn't
children.
addressed, but it's called testamentary guardianship. I'm sorry, but that is something I didn't address. It wasn't a situation, but that's not common, but it happens every now and then. But it's called testamentary guardianship, kind of like what was in Jimmy's will about Chad. That was kind of the situation there. He announced in his will who he wanted to, to take care of him if your mom and dad weren't around and he was still a minor. That is contestable still, even though it's in your will and you say it. Georgia law allows other interested parties to contest that piece of your will in juvenile court and or in superior court if they feel like it's a will construction issue. But most of those contests would take place in juvenile court if somebody had a problem with whoever was named as the testamentary guardian.
There's a question about what about a place to store computer passwords, and I would say that would be awesome if you had all your computer passwords in a book or in that book that we passed out. So many things, if you pay everything online or if your accounts are accessible online, it would probably speed up and help people if all those kinds of things were in one place. And I know everywhere you go, they won't have a password, and that's good for us, but yeah, you need to have those where somebody can have access to them, and that will help a lot. Or maybe something like that. I know a lot of times computer passwords change very often because they make you. So you, in addition to the safe deposit box, you may have one drawer in one place. You know, and again, I know we referenced the passing my father-in-law a couple times, but he had been diligent some months before he died to make sure that people in the family knew there's one place in my computer that has a whole lot of this kind of information, and everybody knew it. So they go right there and have a whole lot of what the family really needed to know in that time. If someone's a grown up and their marriage is in the middle of dissolving, okay, they're in the hospital suddenly, they're sick, who's the hospital gonna look to make decisions for somebody normally in an ER? I'm not used to working in ER. Somebody shows up suddenly sick in the hospital, and who they gonna look to help make a decision?
Well, if the person is still married, then they'll look to the spouse to make that decision. And I think that would be the legal, you can correct me. Right.
But they could, with a durable alternative health care, have that name, you know, that's ongoing.
Yes, of course. If you had someone else named, then the hospital should go by that legal document. Now, again, the person who makes the most noise a lot of times will be heard by physicians making decisions. So that's why it is so important for you to be diligent in documenting in every way that you can what your wishes are in terms of your medical care. Do you have something else you wanted to ask me?
I think this one's going to be for Jerry. If I have like a 501k, 401k or a retirement account, and it has a listed beneficiary, can that later be contested or anything like it? I'll even throw in like an insurance policy, and your insurance policy should have a listed beneficiary, and that's going to go to somebody. Is there a way to contest that, or is that just what it is with the investment people and the insurance people?
It will trump your will. If you go in and you say on your retirement plan that you want your wife to be the beneficiary of that, it's going to your wife. If you say in your will you want it to be your children, there's a conflict there, but the bank's not going to go ask for a copy of your will. Think about it. The bank won't ask, or Edward Jones or some place like that's not going to go asking for a copy of your will. They're going to look and see who that beneficiary is, and who that beneficiary is how it's going to be paid out.
Jerry, you may discuss this. We mentioned different kinds of bank accounts that just go straight to whoever's names are on. You want to discuss that, or because I know that's the thing. Sometimes people say, "Well, that's part of the state." If the bank account's set up a certain way,
yes,
it really can circumvent the will. Right?
It will. That's very true. You have to be careful about that. A lot of times, my daughter has lived here for. Well, I'll take myself and my brother. My brother lives in Cartersville. So mother put down that I was the one who could write checks and things if anything happened to her. But we also made sure that the beneficiaries was me and my brother equally, so I wouldn't be the one entitled to the money. Now, if I'm entitled to the money because I'm named on the checking account as a beneficiary at the bank, I can disavow that and go to Judge Parker and say, I'm not going to accept this except it be split between me and my brother accordance to the will. So I would have that option to do. But when it comes to money, I can tell you, don't trust a whole lot of people. Yeah, they got an opportunity to get some money. A lot of times they will. And in things that Judge Parker has to deal with, some of that's called found money. Ain't so and so died, and so I'm a nephew or a niece. When you get around to found money, a lot of these people want to say that they're entitled to it. So God bless him for what he does and tries to keep a lot of these people at bay.
I don't know if Jerry could probably answer this question too. When someone reaches the age and makes the decision, I'm going to a nursing home, this is the one as a pastor that I encounter people kind of really stubbing their toe or hitting their head against the wall in surprise. Is there any such thing as a free nursing home stay?
There is Medicaid, which is a free nursing home stay. If you're on Social Security, they're going to take that Social Security money, and they're going to use that. Let's say you didn't have any property, and you go into the nursing home. If you were getting the average Social Security benefit is $1,543 a month, you would take that money and you would sign it basically over to the nursing home. The state of Georgia picks up the difference between that, and they're supplemented by the United States government to the state. But long story short, they're going to get you Social Security money, but the rest of it will be picked up by the state. There's a 5-year look back. Let's say you had a 100-acre farm, you gave it to your son 3 years ago. For 2 years left on that. 3 years ago, subtract 3 from the 5, you get 2 years. The family is going to be responsible for it for 2 years because that son owns that property and it's been transferred within that 5 years. So that money could be recouped from the son. It goes back to a case many years ago. Up north, they used to take mom and daddy's farm. I mean, down south, we would take mom and daddy's, no, let me get it straight. Up north, they would take mom and daddy's farm, and down south, we would not. And so they filed, I think, in Michigan and said, hey, this ain't right. We taking mom and daddy's farm up here in Michigan. You people down in Georgia is not. And so they filed suit, won the suit. So they're going to go after your farm. They say this has got to be administered consistently across the United States. So they do that now. So the answer is you could have a free home, free stay in the nursing home, except they get your Social Security.
Or your home, or your, I mean.
Yes.
But if I still got a house and it's worth $250,000 or $150,000, and I move out of it and go to the nursing home.
Yes, when you die, then they can go in there and they can go after that home. If you got somebody else living in that home, such as a husband or a wife, then they have to make some kind of provision for them. But eventually that home will be taken by the government through legal means.
And I just say that because I've run into times with like, well, nursing home being mean, and it's like, well, I'm gonna go to another nursing home. That's just the way the financial aspect of that works. So it's not an aspect of somebody being mean or hateful. That's just the way they recoup their expenses. Also, if I have a joint account with someone and they are going into a nursing home, so half that money's mine. How much of that did the nursing home require?
When you go into a nursing home, you will declare what assets you have, and it'll be put on a sheet. The nursing home will take that sheet, and then they'll verify with that bank the money that's in there. How they would do it on a joint account, I haven't seen that done by the state of Georgia. but I imagine it could be a legal issue that could come up. So if you've got a joint account with somebody, the technical answer is the person in the nursing home cannot have over $2,000. So what you would want to do would be transfer any assets like that over to that other party prior to you going into the nursing home, and people start shuffling money around trying to make sure that that has been done. But that statement that you're going to sign is going to say, have you transferred any assets to anybody in the last 5 years? So be careful with all that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the questions are very specific. You asked them, and I want to make sure we try to answer them, but the real specific answer to your question is if you got concerns about those kind of things, today's the day to get started on them. Because as Jerry just said in his last statement, when you sign a statement, first of all, it's legal. Well, the other thing is, we're Christians, you know, and we ought to be saying the truth. And so when you sign a statement that says I haven't been shuffling money around in the last 5 years, you might pull that over on somebody else, but you're not pulling over on God. And so you need to tell the truth about what you're doing. We need to be people of truthfulness in all our lives. So that's one reason we're having these kind of things, is think about it, decide what you want to do, and start moving in those directions. Another question that I wrote down, because I was running this in a positive way, I know a lot of things we're saying, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, but it's just more of a statement. There are VA benefits that help in certain situations that I've never been in the military, so I'm not going to be a beneficiary of those kind of things. But if you have a military background, you and your spouse are available to certain kinds of benefits that other people aren't. And so in the stage of life you're in or headed toward, it'd be a great thing to do to educate yourself, and maybe that's a whole other class we need to have at some point in time that you need to investigate.
What Wesley's saying is very true. There's an office in Dalton and there's one in Rome that you can deal with if your spouse has been in the military. So you would contact them and see what type benefits and the amount of the benefit that you would be able to access, and that money should be used to pay for a nursing home if you go into one. So that's another source. The other thing is, if you have insurance, I'll go into that one because it's a little bit related. You can get long-term health insurance, and if you've got long-term health insurance, it can go to offset the cost of the nursing home. So it'll go, and then veterans benefits can go. Veterans benefits are also tied into your net worth and things like that. So you've got to go through that agent either in Rome or Dalton. I've done that recently, and the people in Dalton are a little bit nicer. So I would use them.
That's my cousin, Jerry. And the other thing on VA benefits is, just because I've encountered it, unless things have changed, sometimes VA benefits will help you in assisted living. And I know we have a representative from the Mountains, right? Morning Point, I'm sorry. I didn't know where you were. But Morning Point with us, Ms. Hensley is here today, and Sarah ran into her, and they provided some different things in your packets. And she can answer better questions, but I do know that sometimes VA benefits will kick in and help in assisted living, and people are not aware of that. They think, well, I've got to go maybe to a nursing home. The other thing I'll just say generally about assisted living, my mom's here, she can talk to you about assisted living too. She no longer works in that area, but she did for years. Is that assisted living, when I ask the trick question about what's free, well, nothing's really free. Somebody's paying for everything. But if it's coming out of your pocket, one of the things you need to know is a lot of times assisted living is actually cheaper than a nursing home, because a nursing home is having to provide much more expensive services to you at that point in your life. Some people think, well, that's the only choice. But if you have resources and you're going to spend those resources, and you will expend them in a nursing home, then there may be a time that you say, well, I don't really need all that nursing home care, and assisted living may be a great place for you for some period of time, and a lot of people don't think about it in that way. And so my wife added the quality of care and quantity of care, and you got to think about how much time and how much quality and what that looks like for you in the stage you're in. So I'm not pitching that other than to say a lot of times there are other options that you may not think about it if you're just real in here thinking, well, I'll end up in a nursing home one day. But again, maybe it's stay at home, maybe it's have sitters, and those are all things that you can think about. Did I miss anybody's question that turned one in? Or did somebody come up with another question? Sister Diane.
I found one for Jerry. You was talking about the joint account. Now, like Troy and I have a joint account. Is Troy or that? And how would that?
And after Jerry shares, I may have my wife speak to that just a hair, because there's some things that you run into in banking that, just like healthcare, you're gonna have to stand on your own 2 feet to get some of this stuff done. And just the kind of checking accounts that people need to have when you have a. Before she comes up here, when you go to a bank, like a lot of places, they're going to give you the most expedient answer that helps them do their job in the way they think is okay. That may not be what you need to have done for you.
Okay, well, I guess I'm speaking on this based on our recent experience with my dad passing away. But I also, while I was in nursing school, worked at a bank and knew accounts, so I do know a little bit about accounts. In terms of the accounts that they offer, and ownership of the accounts, like your account, Diane, or Troy, that would be joint tenants with the rights of survivorship. So if something happened to Troy, then that account would be yours. You own that currently together, but if one of you passed, then the other would assume ownership of that account, and that money would be yours. You would not have to go through probate, is my understanding. And this was also touched on briefly. If you want, like a parent, like my parent, to remain in charge, she's completely capable of doing her financial business, but she did want that security of having other people having access to her accounts. So my brother and I would be signees on or signers on that account. There is also the account where you would have an account that's payable on death. So the payable on death account would, for example, list my brother and would list me as beneficiaries to that account. So in the event that my mom, passed away, that account would automatically become ours as beneficiaries and would also not have to go through that probate process. So we would assume ownership of that account. Now, was your question about nursing home and the joint? As owners, as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, and that's more than likely what your account is, the person who passed away, the other person would immediately continue as the owner of that account. And you would just have to go through the process of having the name changes and all that.
I'll tell you, I've never seen them go after a joint account that was between a husband and a wife, so I don't think you'll ever see that become a problem. Never seen it done.
All right, I'm going to ask Heather one more question. I was making notes, and she mentioned, we'll take more questions here in just a second, when she was speaking, that if you don't have all the stuff legally done in a video, sometimes it helps a lot. And then I know Judge Parker said, well, a video will not suffice as a will at the end of life, but she keeps saying, squeaky wheel gets the grease, and in the hospital, sometimes a real squeaky way to be a wheel is to have a video. What is that video? What are you talking about?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to help yourselves and you're going to help your families if you have as much documentation as you can. So in the absence of a living will or a durable power of attorney for health care, you need to have anything else that would support the case of what you want your wishes to be. So for example, if I say, do not resuscitate me, I don't want to be put on a mechanical ventilator, but I don't have any documentation to back that up, what is going to happen? I'm going to be on a ventilator, more than likely. Your family, theoretically, are supposed to be the ones to make your decisions in the absence of those, but I will tell you from experience that's not the case in many facilities. The doctor will make that decision. So in our situation, we did not have the paper documentation, but my dad was very specific in terms of what his wishes were. So one day I had a video. I just said, well, let me just make a video. If you're not going to have that paperwork, or you don't feel like doing that paperwork, let me just have a video. And so he did. He spoke of, things that showed that he was fully mentally capable of making decisions, and that he said, I do not want to be resuscitated. And I'll tell you that the night that he died, the hospital intubated him, put him on a ventilator, and I had to actually send that video to the physician in order for them to follow his wishes.
So again, medical situations are very fluid, okay? And the medical system, to their credit, they worked and trained their whole life to keep people living, okay? And we're Christians, we're all for life, okay? But we all also have to figure out what that means to us and how we navigate it when it comes to an end. So when it comes to an end, many times you have to be the one saying, I think this is the end, because the medical community will always fight for you to have another day or week or year. And that's what they're trained to do. That's not a criticism. So you have to think about what that means in your life and how that's going to play out. And you have to advocate for what you desire. And if it's for another day or week or year, okay. If it's not, you have to advocate for that too. So you have to advocate for your own health. And that's part of what we're just trying to share in your desires. Yes, sir.
If the two executors of the estate and one of them passes away, can one do the closure on the estate?
Okay, so two's named and but one's left. Okay.
Yes, sir. Very simple answer, yes. And even sometimes when there are co-executors named and they're both still living, one says, you know what, I live in Indiana and I can't really do this. They can renounce their right to serve. So they can actually, even though the will says, they're both supposed to serve in that capacity, one can renounce his or her right to serve. But yes, and usually if the language in the will is correct, it's going to say, well, I name, Richie and Claude as my co-executors. But if one is unwilling or unable to serve, then I appoint the other co-executor as the singular executor. Usually there's going to be that type of language in a will. Sometimes there's not, but it does leave that one open to be able to do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your questions. Anybody else got a question before Brother David?
Not a question, comment about what's happening this today. My brother passed away in February. Without a will. He had a sizable insurance policy and a sizable 401k. Still tied up to this day. And the reason is he had my mother as beneficiary of both of them. She died in October before he died. And now we've got this situation that we're going to pay it out to her estate, but they said no, she's pre-deceased. So that makes it up. The reason I'm saying all this is how important it is to take care of all this.
Yeah, and I know.
Don't have that money for the day.
Right. So he done a lot of wise things to provide 401k and insurance. But we don't know when we're going to pass, and so a lot of times we think I took care of that. Okay, part of what we're saying is take care of it, but then the other thing today is keep it taken care of, because all these circumstances change, and if somebody passes away, they're part of this chain of possession or chain of stewardship. Then there's something else to take care of. And so it can get really complicated, and thank you for sharing that as a testimony. And I know we've related what we've gone through in the last few months several times today. It's just these things happen, and they're going to happen to everybody at different phases of life. So we learn, and it's great to share. One of the worst things in the world is sometimes I think Christians are afraid to talk about what happens when we die, you know, and we shouldn't be worried about it. The last thing anybody I know wants to do, though, is leave a burden, and we want to leave a blessing, and you're wanting to do that, and I thank you for being here today. Any other question before we have some lunch, because I know that's on my mind. All right. I know we have several with us live on Facebook because they couldn't be here today. We're going to try to have, if we got some packets left over, Sister Sarah, we're going to leave those here till tomorrow because some people want those copies of those things. If they're in and out of church, we can have copies of that. If you didn't get everything you wanted, there's a thank you brochure slip trying to list everybody we wanted to thank, and we hope we didn't leave anybody out. But I do thank everybody on our panel. I think the funeral homes in town all provided some stuff that you have some copies of. We didn't talk really a lot about funeral planning today, but that may be a future topic. Again, we were thankful to have representative from Morning Point with us, and the Fountains also provided some information, and so did Calhoun Health Care and Gordon Health and Rehabilitation. So we didn't answer all your questions. We hope we've gotten you encouraged and motivated and freed up enough to go find your answers. And we also, we weren't going to recommend anybody, Richie, but or Honorable Judge Parker, but we did promote a lawyer today a little bit, and I say yes to that. But we have a lot of good Christian people in our community to help you navigate these decisions. And we want to introduce you to those in whatever way we can. And so in your packets there's some information to open some doors, and the panel will be around. You can ask them more questions, but we can't give you advice. We're not trying to advise you in detailed things, but thank the Lord for an opportunity to be here today. And we're going to have a dismissal prayer, and we're going to have an opportunity to fellowship some more. But the most important thing we do, if we're going to prepare for the future in faith, is we've got to know that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. And I hope that you understand that everything we've shared today comes not from a material, practical way to face eternity, but from a spiritual way to know that we are all sinners, and our sin has separated us from Jesus. But praise God, He loved us while we were still sinners, and He came and lived without sin, died for sin, and conquered death, hell, and the grave, rose, and ascended to the right hand of the Father. And He's gone to prepare a place for you and for me. If we'll come to Him and humble ourselves by faith and receive Him and be saved, we'll have a home in heaven. So we don't have to worry about that. We just live based on grace, knowing that God is readying a place for us and us for that place, and we're leaving a blessing to our loved ones. So let's pray, and let's ask the Lord to bless our time of fellowship. Lord, we thank you for time to gather. We thank you for each of our speakers. Lord, I thank you for their walk of faith, each one of them Christian men and women who are trying to be excellent in their field, to do their very best to show Jesus in the way that they live and work and advise and serve. God, I thank you for each one who's here today. I pray if there's one that's lost, that even in this moment they would realize that their provision for eternity is only to be found in you. God, I thank you for those who are preparing the food. Lord, I thank you for the group of people who helped prepare this day for us, for Sister Peggy and Brother Gerald, Sister Sarah and Brother Larry, Sister Karen, for all those who served to plan, because this is needed, and we need to take away the fear, and we need to live by faith. Lord, we thank you that we have a future in Jesus. In your precious name we pray. Amen. All right. In just a moment, they'll open that window.